But this goes into a bit more detail and says, actually, protecting the environment and building a sustainable and equitable society are very closely aligned objectives, and they're basically both strongly opposed to corporate power and the exploitation of the environment and the people that represents. This is developed a bit further by the issue of trade justice. Their roots extend also to a global economic system that takes more out of a poor continent than it puts in. Debts they cannot pay force African nations relying on commodity sales to overuse their fragile soils, thus turning good land to desert. Trade barriers in wealthy nations, and in many developing ones, make it hard for Africans to sell their goods for reasonable returns, putting yet more pressure on ecological systems. So basically, this completely ruthless exploitation of societies is forcing them to do whatever they can to make that last bit of short-term money. They can't invest in their land. They can't preserve their land. They can't preserve the assets. They've got to exploit them as quickly as possible in order to try and survive. Another interesting point, I said there's a lot of these points, which I found fascinating, was conflict, environmental stress and conflict. Darfur was an example recently which isn't completely attributable to climate change, but is attributable in some degree to overgrazing, to droughts due in part to climate change, and to a whole range of environmental factors. It's not purely a social phenomenon. So this was pointed out 20 years ago again. The deepening and widening environmental crisis presents a threat to national security and even survival that may be greater than well-armed, ill-disposed neighbours and unfriendly alliances. Already in parts of Latin America, Asia and the Middle East, environmental decline is becoming a source of political unrest and international tension. And you can also say this to a degree with the food crisis, which has caused a lot of political tension recently, and is related to broader environmental issues as well as obviously various demand side factors. Okay, one point which I partially touched on a second ago, ecological debt, which I have the video of Naomi Klein talking about the issue. They may show profits on balance sheets of our generation, but our children will inherit the losses. We borrow environmental capital from future generations with no intention or prospect of repaying. They may damn us for our spendthrift ways, but they can never collect on our debt to them. So I think that's another really interesting point. I mean, obviously it's a factor between us and our children, but it's also a factor between us in the developed world who've used these resources and those in the developing world who will not get the same level of resource use. I also like this point here, which was thought was quite poignant. But the results of the present profligacy are rapidly closing the options for future generations. Remember, this was written 20 years ago, so I'm seeing, but the result of the present profligacy are rapidly closing the options for future generations. I'm thinking, in 1988, I was only 5. So I am the next generation, more or less. Certainly reading this from 20 years ago, you've got to think that you've got to feel some empathy for the future generations, because we're really getting close to being those future generations. So we're starting to be able to imagine the situation that they're going to be facing, because we're almost there. Our options are getting more limited as time goes by and less is done about the whole range of sustainability issues. Um, the options are the options for a peaceful future are dramatically reducing. Again, the link between poverty and the environment. Poverty is not only an evil in itself, but sustainable development requires meeting the basic needs of all and extending to all the opportunity to fulfill their aspirations for a better life. In a world in which poverty is endemic, we will always be prone to ecological and other catastrophes. So it's absolutely part of the environmental agenda, even in its narrowest sense, to reduce poverty, because without doing so we cannot protect the environment. That's as much as I want to say about that for now. Okay, I forgot to say, go and buy this book. It's going to be the best 74p you'll ever spend. So on Amazon in the UK, amazon.co.uk, you can buy this for 74p. Okay, it's a brilliant book. Go and buy it.